go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the August TPA membership meeting. My name is Craig Douglas. I'm here supporting our team today as we go through some great material. Just a couple housekeeping notes as we get started. We're recording the session today, and we'll be posting a bunch of links and some materials for reference. You'll see the references on the slides as we go through the deck today. If you miss anything in the chat or if we miss anything in the chat, don't worry, we'll get that out to everybody in a follow-up as we typically do. Um, Again, thanks for being here today. We are going to use the chat and the Q&A function throughout the course of the session today, so please feel free to use those. And with that, I will turn it over to Patrick to get us started.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have a lot to go through. Pleased that we will be joined by Jeremy Yale, Lauren House from ODP to speak to us quite a bit about performance-based contracting for supports coordination. They will also hopefully have time to give us some insights on the recent work group that ODP hosted on CPS services. So we want to talk about both of those topics with you today. So Craig, if you can go next slide, we're going to talk about all of these topics today. Very briefly, we just want to get into a little bit at the federal level. Anchor has done a nice job of assembling the top line takeaways, the things you need to know with respect to the reconciliation bill at the federal level. There's really not anything new to report to my knowledge this morning as we speak about the Pennsylvania budget and its status. But we are going to take, as I've said, the deeper dive into performance-based contracting for supports coordination. Now that that bulletin and all the supporting documents and the timeline and everything that you need to know, and sports coordination, as we will see and talk about today, affects everybody in a waiver in our system. So it certainly affects everyone, as you well know, that you support and serve. And then the final thing that we want to do today, and I will talk about this briefly, as unfortunately I cannot be on for the last 30 minutes of today's meeting, we have communicated that there are amendments to the market index legislation that TPA and the other associations have been promoting for the past several years and actively promoting this year in a unified way. So we want to go through those amendments. We want to give you a little foundation of the bill and exactly what the original bills have said, which are now and will be bipartisan in both chambers of the General Assembly of Pennsylvania. And we will talk to you about how ODP and Department of Human Services has weighed in to say, here's how we also would support those bills. So we want to give you all of that detailed information. Nancy Murray and our board president, Sue Lautenbacher, are going to do that with you, as well as Sue's going to be very active in talking about some of the CPS requirements in the work group, because Sue is one of the TPA representatives on that. So Craig, if you can go to the next slide. I just briefly want to take a run through what you will see in this document. It's an 8-page document. I think we're able to drop it into chat. There's a link to it on our site. Take a look when you can if you haven't already. These are really some of the elements that we've highlighted on this particular slide. As you go through the document, it will give you a lot of detail. Anchor is very deliberately talking about focusing on things that are most immediate. There is the potential, because of the timeline of this bill, that there could be changes before some of these things are enacted. But some of the things that we know have been discussion points in our world certainly include the work requirements, eligibility redeterminations. We've heard Kristen talk about being very aware of this and some of the difficulties that may occur getting people eligible for services, getting applications for eligibility when people have lost eligibility for waivers. So pay attention very closely to things in terms of monitoring that. And then rural health transformation, that is something more generally, but all of these topics are covered in a great amount of detail on the Anchor document. We invite you to take a look at that. The next slide really is something that we just wanted to continue to show you because it's relevant to today's discussion. And even though this was developed in April, and we may have a joint piece of advocacy going out today, possibly on specifically the market index bills and the annual adjustment to fee schedule rates that we're going to be talking about in this meeting. But if you look at really the things that are here, there's still not an approved budget. So it's still very important that we maintain the level of funding in the IDA community system here in Pennsylvania. Secondly, bipartisan support for annual market legislation. Not only has that occurred through the Senate bill, that is in the process of occurring, with many Republicans in our General Assembly having already signed on to this important legislation. And third, we really have begun a process working directly with ODP on some policy issues. And the CPS work group is a very good example of that. So as we kind of look at, if you can go next slide, Craig, I do want to take just a moment or two to kind of go through the annual adjustment of ODP fee schedule rates with you, because we'll take the deeper dive a little bit later on. But the annual increases are indexed to inflation. I'll just briefly remind you that right now, as you probably know, there is only a requirement in regulation that rates be reviewed once every 3 years. And that's how it has been since the enactment of the regulations in 2019. We already have a bipartisan bill in the Pennsylvania Senate, that is Senate Bill 617, introduced on April 11th. There is a forthcoming bipartisan bill in the House. I know there's at least 3 Republicans who have signed on to that bill. We have unified advocacy and support from the various associations across Pennsylvania. Many of you we know belong to associations other than TPA. And DHS, as I've noted earlier, has already submitted proposed amendments to the legislators involved in these. We've also received outreach from Imogen Wright, who's the executive director for the House Human Services Committee on the Democratic side, looking to the IDA community, asking for our input on what our priorities are, given the flux and change at the federal level and with the state budget, of course, also hinging on that to a great extent. So we're going to talk about those issues in details. We're going to go into these amendments. So I want to remind everyone that despite the fact that there are some significant changes, there are some things that are a bit more onerous. At the end of the day, this bill is about getting an annual adjustment to rates, which DHS is indicating its support for, versus what is in regulation today, which requires a review only once every 3 years. So with that, we are going to head into supports coordination. So we can go next slide. And Lauren and Jeremy, I believe you were on with us, so I want to introduce you and thank you today for joining us once again. It looks like maybe you're not driving, Jeremy, so that is good to see. So Lauren's with us as well.
Yes,
Yep,
Lauren.
I am here, but I'm the one that's on the road, perpetually on the road, but
Okay.
all for good stuff, all for good stuff. Glad to be
Yeah,
here,
we
Patrick.
appreciate
Thank you.
that. Be safe, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time in your travels to join us today. So I guess on the slide that's up right now, Lauren, I know you can't see, but try to get a copy out to you in advance, and I know Jeremy can help us. Yes, he'll be available to kind of comment directly. But wanted to give each of you the opportunity to catalog and summarize kind of what's up here, starting with the bulletin. We know there's a lot of attachments, and then I think once you have a chance to do that, kind of dive into really the scope and scale of supports coordination, how this does affect the system and everybody served by it, and talk a little bit about that because I know the numbers are in the waiver. I want to get into those a little bit. But before we do that, I just wanted to give each of you the chance to provide an overview now that these documents are out there and everything is official.
Sure.
Sure.
We'd be glad to. Yeah, Jeremy, do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at this.
Go
So
for it.
good. Again, good morning, everyone. For those of you that I don't know, the Bureau Director of Policy and Quality Management with the office. So as you see on your screen, if you're able to be in a place where you can review that, we have kind of the rundown of the key documents associated with supports coordination organization, PBC. The bulletin is where we will continue to publish standards. And you would, if those of you that were following this process with residential services, you would have seen a very similar approach. We have all of our standards built into the 1915C waiver and B4 waiver, and then the performance standards themselves and the timeline are affiliated with a bulletin. And as we move forward, we'll be able to update the standards in that bulletin. So we did submit our proposed waiver amendments to CMS. I could share with this group that last week we had a routine meeting with CMS. It's referred to as the 15-day. So 15 days into a proposed amendment submission, CMS invites the state to meet with them to talk about any details. It's also an opportunity for CMS to ask any questions directly to the state. So we met last week with CMS, and I think Kristen, Julie, and I came out of that meeting feeling pretty energized, pretty hopeful that CMS understood what we were attempting to do and how we had constructed that and thought about it. Complimented us on our stakeholder engagement. They commented that they don't see that level of depth in every state, in every proposed change. And again, we saw the public comment period really shape supports our final proposal dramatically, right? Like from what we initially put out as a concept to where we ended in a submission to CMS was quite a bit different. So feeling pretty good about the proposal. The implementation guide, and for all of these documents, I would just push, Patrick, your membership to the performance-based contracting resource page on my ODP. And I can certainly drop that in the chat if folks haven't found that yet, but that's really the one-stop shop.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I'll jump in and say, yeah, we have, I think, most everything on our site. Craig and I chatted a little bit before this meeting. We'll try to drop things in as they come up. But as you said, you have them posted. We have them posted. Easily accessible. We want to make sure that remains the case. And just while I have your attention, I'm just curious in your discussion with CMS, was there anything, having been through this process many times, that you were anticipating potentially as issues? You didn't encounter anything, obviously, but was it anything that the state ODP was concerned about that they may question at the federal level?
I think we were fairly optimistic going into the conversation. The one area that's a little bit different than residential is that we're pretty dramatically changing the rate structure or the payment methodology for supports coordination. So we were anticipating maybe some additional questions on that. One of the other challenges to this is not only amendments to our 1915 C and B4 waiver, but this also, because we're talking about targeted service management, excuse me, we're also talking about a state plan amendment. So it's a little bit more complicated with a SPA. You have not seen that document published yet. It's of all of this, it's fairly planned. It just essentially aligns our state plan with with this structure so that we can continue to incorporate TSM into the payment methodology.
I don't want to short circuit Lauren, anything that you wanted to weigh in on, but I did want to kind of get into TSM and those numbers with you. So before I do that, let me just allow you, Jeremy, to kind of finish up, or if Lauren wanted to add anything about these particular documents.
Sure. Now, it sounds like your membership is aware of them. If there's questions, I would just continue to suggest you push any of those questions back to the mailbox, the PBC mailbox. We have been doing a decent job manning that and processing those questions and getting them back as quickly as possible. We do have intent to take all of those questions specific to SEO and put them in a frequently asked questions document. And again, we likely will post that out on our PBC website. Lauren, anything else about the considerations or self-assessment document?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing to say is with supports coordination, you have something a little bit extra, that considerations document. That really is to, I think, the intention here was to get supports coordination to start thinking kind of about like quality management and how to incorporate the quality management process into, anything that has to be done at the organizational level to start to implement all of the performance-based contracting standards. So that's something a little extra for supports coordination. Certainly folks, I think, are, immediately wanting to dive into that self-assessment workbook and start to see the process details. Those process details, remember, that's where really the meat and potatoes are. When you ask the question, how is ODP going to measure my SCO or my residential provider organization on any of these standards and measures? That the process details are what people I think are really, anxious to see. But I do want folks to, at least consider, at least take a look at that planning considerations document, because I do think it's kind of a nice sort of entrance into and thinking about not just how do I do this one thing, how do I meet this one measure, which is important, but how do I think about these measures, right, holistically as an entire organization? And not only that, Patrick, I know, a lot of your membership are residential providers as well. And I want folks to know that these measures, right, were not written in isolation and they were not written in sort of silos. They were very intentionally written to where they're complementary, right, of one another. And so supports coordination, right, has measures around encouraging folks to look at alternatives to our, typical license 6400, right, as a residential option. And as you know, our residential providers were encouraged to, expand their service offerings to supported living and life sharing. We have incentive payments, right, for folks who transition out of a license 6400 to supported living or life sharing. So, right, it's those types of things that I think are important to call out as your members are reviewing these documents. And again, really thinking about how do we plan for this stuff as a whole, not only as an organization, but with who are our partners, right, in this work, and how do we improve that collaboration to make sure that we're supporting people really holistically.
Thanks, Lauren. I guess as I kind of read the documents and tried to tie them together, just within supports coordination for a moment, a lot of it struck me as I'll call sort of self-service. Here's what you need to educate yourself on. Here's what you need to think about strategically to sort of look big picture the way you just described. Do you and ODP sort of see it the same way? You're trying to give tools to people to take that dive in there, but also apply it to themselves more specifically?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it, Patrick. That's exactly the intention. And, hopefully people get a lot of utility out of that. And for folks who, maybe just haven't had it takes a second to step back and think that way, right? Like we're so, I think everybody is so busy. Everybody is so focused on what do I need to do, to just get through the day. And so, I think I appreciate that people, if they're able to take a moment and digest that and really start to sit back and think about it. I just really appreciate you calling that out very intentionally, just to remind folks that is important, right, to see how does this apply as an organization overall and to everyone that we're working with.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And we know it's all there, so we encourage everybody to take a look. It's a lot. We know it's a lot. We know the timeline. It is pretty tight and aggressive too, but we want to continue to do that here. I'll be talking about an upcoming session. We want to continue to really support education, but make sure that everybody is aware. You've put everything out there, so to the extent you as members and you, particularly in supports coordination, can start to do what I think we saw many residential providers do early on, really just try to get educated on everything and do that step to kind of apply it to the unique characteristics and mission of your organizations. So one thing that I definitely want to highlight, this is a continued move, nothing new, but movement away from every willing and qualified provider standard when you talk about the waiver amendments and so forth. And one of the things I wanted to pay particular attention to just what is really the scope of supports coordination. And according to your waiver application, it looks like there's over 40,000 people, not surprisingly, because you break this down by the number of people in the consolidated waiver, participant directed and family supports waiver and community living waiver. And then, Jeremy, you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about the state plan amendment, another 17,000 plus in TSM. So the way I read that is there's 57,000 people that are served by sports coordination in PA. And obviously that's a lot of folks, and this is a big change for a group that already seems, we would say, pretty stressed and strained with workforce and all the other issues. So is that an accurate take? Is that how many people we're talking about that are affected by this change in supports coordination? I guess, is that how many people? And I think it's also noted in your waiver application that the 57 supports coordination organizations are supporting.
Yeah, you have the math and the numbers right. We generally talk about 60,000 people in services, right? Like, so we have some individuals in state centers and in private ICF, but generally we're talking about a range somewhere between 57 and 60,000 people. So yeah, it really, this change impacts everyone essentially in our service delivery model. It's a big change, you know, and back to those tools, wanted to give practical resources that agencies can really take back and begin to internalize and incorporate these changes. Take a look at their quality management planning. Take a look at some, and maybe this is a good pivot to the next slide. You know, really begin to take a look at some of the performance measures and look at what their current status and progress is with each of these areas, and then really have the tools to kind of drill in, form some subcommittees within their organizations, form groups and teams to really start to pull these pieces apart and roll up their sleeves and figure out how they're going to incorporate PPC into their organizations.
Yeah, thanks,
So
Jeremy. And yeah, great time to really talk about this. So I wanted to give again you and Lauren the chance to kind of talk about all of these performance measures, and they are now on the screen from your document, from everything that's in the bulletin and the measurements and everything we've talked about. So I'd like you to feel free to give the overview and kind of give us the broader context. And I was kind of interested in, after you do that, maybe drilling down into access, resource navigation, and technology a little more deeply, because I'm just interested in the thoughts and kind of the driving message behind that and where we might be able to take those now and into the future. But I was interested most by them, but then members may have other opinions, and I certainly want to hear your opinions. But if you don't mind kind of briefly touching upon these at a high level, and then maybe we can talk about those three in a little more detail.
Lauren, did you want to jump in? Do you want me to get us roll?
Of them. And I think access is a great place to start, right, Patrick, because of the point that you just made and you know, Jeremy just described how supports coordination, this is everybody, right? This is pretty much every person, right, who we're supporting in Pennsylvania. So access to supports coordination is absolutely a priority, right? When we think about, right, moving away from every willing and qualified, and, you know, really looking at supports coordination and having the expectation, right, that our supports coordination organizations are accessible, that they're available, and that people have a choice, right, among not just, you know, one, maybe two, but that people have real legitimate choice in terms of who they're getting that service from, because, you know, we all view it as a critical service. They are, you know, the sports coordinators are absolutely, you know, overstressed, overtaxed, overburdened in terms of what they are asked to do. We need people to be able to access them. And so, you know, that's why we're trying to balance, right, a lot of what we're doing with, you know, reduction in terms of administrative load and administrative burden. And so really, you know, access was always sort of front and center, you know, when it came time for us to start planning for, you know, how do we measure the quality of supports coordination? And so the access measures are set right now at things like remaining open, right? that they're going to stay open for intake, especially during, the worst of sort of the pandemic times. We had a lot of SCOs who basically shut down, anybody new coming into those SCOs, and we created some access issues, and especially in some counties, some more rural counties across the Commonwealth. And so that is absolutely a priority for us to make sure that people have access to supports coordination. It's the thing that, everybody gets no matter what. Even if they're not enrolled in a waiver, they're still able to access supports coordination. And then that supports coordinator, can help connect people and their families to any of those other sort of community resources that might be needed. And that, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but to call out, to sort of dive in on another standard that you specifically addressed, Patrick, is sort of this idea of resource navigation. So while PA Navigate is still relatively new and still sort of up and coming in Pennsylvania, PA Navigate is a super cool resource that we really see as sort of one of those ways that we can enhance service delivery and enhance the way that people get connected to services in Pennsylvania, and not necessarily like supports coordinators finding IDA service providers, right? This is supports coordinators finding housing, finding food banks, finding shelters, finding whatever it is that a person might need, and kind of having the ability to in real time close that loop with those other community service providers who would be able to support that person. So again, between access and resource navigation, helping people get connected to what they need so that they're healthy and safe and that their needs are met, was absolutely a priority as we started crafting some of these standards and measures.
And Lauren, I guess PA Navigate kind of also touches upon technology, maybe not directly as a 10-year performance measure, but that's kind of how I would see that, and hopefully we would see some more benefits from tech. Are there any others, if you can speak to maybe that as a performance measure? Maybe I should just stop there and let you comment on that before I make that connection, and maybe it's not accurate.
Yeah. So technology. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jeremy. No,
So technology in our thinking and approach to PBC is somewhat of a multi-pronged, or at least two-pronged approach, right? One is how do we support supports coordination organizations to incorporate newer technologies to make them more efficient, more effective at the work that they're doing. And out of the other side of my mouth, I have to also just acknowledge that we have a 25-year-old aging system that we call HCSIS that really is the basis of everything that not everything, but a large majority of the activities that our supports coordinators are functioning on. So as your members will notice, Patrick, we don't have a performance measure set to go into effect this first round, this first contract cycle for technology. But what we do have is a pay for performance initiative that's really designed to do those kind of two spheres. One is look at your own technology needs and address those. And then also look at how you can support individuals to learn more about technology and use technology to solve solutions in their essentially in their needs. Leaning into remote supports and assistive technology to navigate the community and access their home in different ways. So we're excited about this. It is an area that we continue to think about in terms of planning for training for supports coordination. We know that we have not quite hit our stride yet, and getting the right information at the right time to our supports coordinators around tech. But we're getting there. We're making a lot of really great progress.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And I appreciate that. And I guess I know I have this kind of idea a couple slides out, but when I hear you talk about check both within sports coordination, particularly with PA Navigate, I'm just curious how you foresee that, if at all, including some of the things that would be behavioral health, mental health, emotional health, physical health, tying through Navigate, or do we still sort of view those as separate systems, or is this sort of a step in the direction of navigating those environments as well to support people?
So PA Navigate in particular, we know what we know, right? Like within our supports coordination organizations and our SCs are really good at organizing around the services and supports that are available through our waivers. The the ceiling, if you will, is the complexity of accessing other systems, and so PA Navigate gives a hub, and it gives another tool, puts another tool in our SE's toolbox to be able to first have somewhat of a record or a directory of the local community resources that are around them. And again, I think you hit on it, right? Like it's it's our health related social needs, right? So accessing food and housing and some of those other human services that are not necessarily in kind of the control or the sphere of a supports coordination organization, but certainly but looking at accessing the behavioral health network, aging, right? As we think about working with our area agency on aging and the resources that kind of envelop that service delivery system and finding areas where they overlap. We know that supports coordinators oftentimes are supporting family systems, right? Because to support an individual, families need support as well. So we're seeing this as kind of a broad approach. I think there's a lot of utility in engaging families, and time will tell. Right, as Lauren mentioned, this is a relatively new platform, but the usability of it and some of the data that we have preliminarily seen as an ability to kind of share utilization back with our SEOs and other stakeholders on how it's being used. I know we don't probably want to talk too much more about this, but the versatility of this particular platform, agencies are able to set up referral processes right within that system. So if there's like a prior approval, or if there are something very specific questions through intake that might be needed, a community agency can set that up within this platform. And so a supports coordinator, along with an individual, can collect that data in real time, put that into an application within the system, and we can get quicker results as we look to try to link and broker services for individuals and families. So
thanks, Sharon. That sounds like a really great advancement. And so I want to encourage everybody providing any service to really take a look at these performance standards, measures, process details that you have out there now. I think in an environment where we're trying to close service gaps and address waiting lists, but hopefully in one place or the other, I want to really encourage provider members, make sure that dialogue is clear. If you have specialty programs and services within certain services that are on the service menu within the waivers, I would see that as something else that we can kind of tighten between the supports coordination and services in various other areas, particularly where we're looking to develop new services and kind of meet those needs. And maybe, and I don't want to brush by anything that you want to talk about, but again, I'll remind everyone the documents are there. You can see all of the detailed measures in the performance standards that are published and a lot of the language around there. So anything that you want to close out on this particular slide, Jeremy and Lauren, and if not, or after you do, We want to kind of get into these billing and payment policy changes and talk a little bit about that next. But anything that you want to wrap up on with respect to the performance measures?
Patrick, I know you have a slide in here about timeline, but I think
Yeah.
while we're concentrating on our performance measures, probably worth noting that ODP is going through what we're referring to as our summits. So we've had Summit 1 already, and the subtitle of that is Measure by Measure. So we are literally walking through each of our measures in an hour and a half so that we have plenty of time to engage with our supports coordination organizations, ask questions, continue to think more deeply about each of these measures and their particular impact. So our next one is scheduled for this coming Monday, the 25th. And we're going to be going through our person-centered practice measures, our quality data integrity measures, and then our quality measures.
Hey,
So
Jeremy,
tune into that.
sorry, while you're kind of talking about this, I'm going to ask Craig to kind of jump to that slide, a couple slides ahead, because we can, billing and payment is really not so immediate. So why don't we let you kind of, because everything is pretty intense now, right? You're talking about this and there's a lot going on. So I just want to have that up kind of while you're talking through this. And if there's anything here that you want to refer to as well.
Sure. So after that, I don't know that we have our measure by measure sessions in here on this timeline. So we're worth jotting this down if you don't have these. So Monday is our next. Our next measure by measure is scheduled for September 5th. And then we have on September 8th a specific dedicated session just for payment and billing. So we're really going to unpackage List A and List B, talk about the new associate SC role, and really take a look at the expectations, how we calculated the current rates, what the expectations are to generate a billable unit, and hopefully give some supports coordination organizations a little bit more understanding, which will hopefully come with a better sense of this as they move forward. On the 15th, we have a training with our performance analysis services. So this will be a training specifically for SCOs to be introduced to the platform that we're going to be using, the My PBC portal, and that will be instructional, kind of lead SCOs from start to end around feeling comfortable around submitting their data and documentation, which is on a fast track beginning October. In addition, Patrick, we have scheduled a variety of virtual office hours. And if that language is not as familiar to some of your members, what that is really just a drop-in. It is what it sounds like. It's virtual office hours in that anyone can register and log in and ask questions. We'll have some minimal structure to that in terms of what ODP wants to present and talk about, and we will really allow SEOs to talk through where they're at and share from their perspective. So looking forward to all of these sessions coming up. We know that they'll bring some peace of mind to many of your members.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. And maybe we'll backtrack now. And I'm going to turn to you, Lauren, because my recollection being that you covered this last month at our July conference, a little bit around the billing and payment policies, and give you a chance to talk about some of these things. And certainly, Jeremy, I know we've talked with you about pay for performance. So really interested in the overview of the payment policies. We know that we're moving to monthly case rates and away from 15-minute units in supports coordination, something that we know you heard a lot of feedback on. And we very much recognize and applaud the efforts of ODP to kind of advance this into that direction. But Lauren, I'll start with you, see if you have anything that you want to say about this. And certainly, Jeremy, your insights as well are most welcome. But Lauren, is there anything that, since the documents are out, that you kind of want to revisit since the last time we talked about this about a month ago?
Not necessarily anything maybe new, but just to kind of reinforce the fact that, as you mentioned, the 15-minute unit in supports coordination has, long plagued a lot of people, a lot of SCs. When we talk to folks about, what are the things you like about the job and what are the things that you don't like about the job? Consistently, right? Almost 100% of the time, it's things I don't like are, having to think about people's lives in these 15-minute units and, the documentation, of course, right, that comes along with that and how, they feel a lot of pressure, right, to every SEO has sort of an individual set amount of units that each SC is intended to get or be able to bill for each either week or month or however they break that down. And that, consistently, like I said, was what we heard in terms of like, this is, I don't want to do this long term, right? And that's not great for the service system. That's not great for people that we're supporting, right? People see this as, let me get some experience, doing this work. I love what I do, right? And I love the people that I'm supporting and I love working in the system. This is what I sort of always envisioned that I would do. But instead of seeing supports coordination as a sort of career, right, they see it as, this is a job and I will be here for however long that I need to be here for, so that I can go and get a job as a program specialist at a residential provider agency and kind of get out of, right, this case management role. And I think historically, that's actually been the reverse, right? Like I remember when I was a DSP, there was a time when, I was like, oh, maybe one day I'll be a case manager, right? And so I think we've really flipped that script, right, which is interesting. And I think in part, right, it's because of, just over time, right, system changes, system pressures, and the changes, right, to the work of supports coordination. And so, I think people are, excited, right, but cautious, right, and nervous about the change. And they're still, I think, start trying to absorb, what does this mean for our SEO and how is the work going to change. And at the end of the day, right, I think the thing that the messaging that's important, right, is that what changes is hopefully, right, people are putting more emphasis on individuals and their families spending the time that they need, not, sort of checking the box anymore, really getting back to doing good person-centered planning. And we're going to help with that, right? Like we have a role in this, we being ODP, in terms of, we're starting to like incentivize, right, those kinds of things. Right now, what's incentivized is bill, 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 right? And we need to, right, sort of change that to, are people really achieving, their outcomes? Do people are people really satisfied with their ability, or with their SC's ability to, craft a person-centered plan that is meaningful to them and has actually made a positive change in their lives? That's where we need to start incentivizing. And I know, we've described this as kind of a long runway, right? Our entrance into PBC is, a lot of stage setting, right? Am I cutting out on you?
No, I think you're good. I was
Okay.
worried for a second you were, but now you're good at the moment.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And so, right, it's kind of stage setting for now, but we will get there, and that is the end. That is the goal, right? That we can start to incentivize, good outcomes for people.
Hey, Lauren, I remember you making a distinction at the conference that this is not per member per month. And I think I tended to look at it that way until you made those
Mhm.
comments that you have to provide a service to qualify for the payment. So you want to comment on that? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is, right? So per member per month, right? That would be just by virtue of, a person being on the SEO's roster, that they would get a monthly payment, but not necessarily have any, requirements for the SC or for the SCO to be able to bill that month, right? And what that would do would effectively really, drive those rates down. But we actually have expectations in terms of, there are some activities, right? We call these the list A and list B activities, I think, as people are now coming to know them and understand them. And so list A, right, are more of those, they're a little more time intensive potentially, but things like you've done the annual ISP meeting, right? You do that once and you bill that month for them. You do an individual monitoring. You've completed that individual monitoring, you're gonna be able to bill that monthly rate for that person. List B activities are more of sort of those, incidental, maybe they take a little bit less time. Maybe I updated somebody's puns and I had a phone call with the individual about, something related to their job. You've documented that you've done 2 of those things, and then you get to bill that month. Same rate, there's no distinction, right? Whether you do 1 list A activity or 2 list B activities, it's the same monthly rate. But I do think that's an important distinction, right, for folks to understand, because that what originally, especially right when we started having early conversations with SCOs, some of them were like, why don't you just do per member per month? And, we really want to focus on people actually, getting something that's meaningful to them. And again, recognizing that the work that the SCs are doing is valuable. Some of it can be time intensive and, not devaluing their work by just going, straight per member per month.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I think, downstream, I can imagine that is something we continue to talk about, just given the scale we talked about earlier, how many people and the difficulty if somebody was okay in a month. But your list A, list B seems to be an acknowledgement of that. So again, it's a change, and I think it's an important change and definitely movement in the positive direction. And I think we'll look forward to continuing the dialogue with you. So there's a lot that I really wanted to cover. I want to make sure I leave some time for CPS and work group. So I want to just kind of quickly go through maybe the last couple of slides with respect to supports coordination. So yeah, I think there was just a few things I listed out, and maybe Jeremy and Lauren, I'll just ask you to kind of comment, and I think you've each done it a little bit here so far, but how this all ties together. You've talked about how PVC is already in place for residential services. You've talked about alignment. I kind of wanted to think a little big picture in terms of how this is supporting multi-year growth strategy, waiting list, how we're promoting innovation and technology, advancements in integrated care. We've talked a little bit about all of this already, but just want to give you each a chance to sort of talk about how you see the future goals and accomplishing some of these things in a broader sense with the change to performance-based contracting for SCs.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then I'm sure Lauren will have some ideas. So I mean, I think these are fairly good descriptions of that high level approach that we're looking at. Obviously, this is about access. This is really around being able to fortify and really support our workforce. We know that we have a high turnover rate for our supports coordination, for our supports coordinators, in addition to our direct support professionals. So in part, making this investment and making these changes are about sustaining the system and stabilizing the system. The shift for us to really lay out over several years where we're going with this process is really around this concept of building some capacity and really looking to supports coordinators so that we can eventually get to benchmarks so that we are all speaking the same language. We know where those key performance areas within our system are. We talk about our rate of competitive integrated employment, and I think that's fairly widely known that we're at 18%. But with some of these areas, we want to be there so that everyone in our system really has an appreciation and understand where those numbers play in. So one of the things that's been as we've been calling it a changing mindset is really this relationship and the shift between person-centered planning and population health. So really driving towards changes with supports coordination there. Um, and we know that our entire system has been built around person-centered planning at the individual level, and that's the SC having roles and having a job to do to support an individual to gain access to their home and community through services and supports and planning. Um, right, like as we begin to do that, we see trends. We have other tools like the HRST, and we have other tools that are going to be able to help us quantify how our population is doing across things like technology, like employment, like rates of chronic disease, and really be able to strategize and hopefully make additional plans to make improvement there. So I want to don't want to monopolize. Lauren, jump in here.
Sure. So, and first of all, right, Patrick, I think, just want to say thank you for, intentionally calling out, right, that again, these standards, these measures, performance-based contracting, multi-year program growth strategy, quality management across the board, none of it, right, is happening in isolation, and none of it has been designed without thinking about the implications on these other, right, sort of initiatives, strategies, approaches, you name it. I know that it feels like a lot, right? There's been a lot of changes, and it's a lot to keep up with. But really the system design is incredibly intentional. So just to kind of call out specifically, since it's on the screen, multi-year program growth strategy. You will see, if you've taken a look at the supports coordination measures, where we start to have some expectations around the accuracy, the timeliness, the folks coming off of puns, if they've been identified to be enrolled in a waiver. We want to speed that up. We want that to be closer to real time, because we need an accurate and representative list of who really is waiting for services, right? Who really needs to be enrolled in an ODP waiver, who needs to get connected to the service system. Because for years we had an incredibly inflated list, right? We know, right? Yes, the capacity over the last couple of years, thanks to the Shapiro administration and his commitment to IDA programs, has absolutely, right, done a lot for waiting list. But as we've started to roll out multi-year program growth strategy, we have also, right, there's been some changes to PUNS policy and when people should and shouldn't be on emergency puns. And so that has been, part of this effort as well. The other piece of that too is when we think about those measures around resource navigation, thinking about you have a new person, who's just come to you for supports coordination service. They're not currently enrolled in anything. When you're starting to talk about doing good person-centered planning, really understanding what people need rather than someone sitting down, first thing and saying, I need a residential provider. And instead of that SC saying, okay, great, you need a residential provider, right? Really doing good person-centered planning, asking why, right? What are the needs? Really understanding people. And maybe, right, through that series of just continuing to ask why, why do you need a residential provider? Well, because I don't know how to cook. Right? Well, why don't like what can we get you, right? What can we do? What kind of education can we do? Rather than there always being this sort of like system default, right? Which is kind of what it's felt like over the last couple of years. So, understanding where can that person get some adult education on, nutrition and healthy cooking and that sort of thing. So all of these things, right, tie together. And again, I just appreciate the fact that the TPA is always very kind of tuned in to the fact that these initiatives are very much intended to be complementary of one another. So thank you.
No, thank you, Lauren. Appreciate all that information and your insights and your comments. And so with that, I want to just then go to our next slide. We do have a session coming up. I also want to invite in Sue Lautenbacher, Nancy Murray, because I'm going to turn this meeting over to them momentarily because I do need to depart in a few moments. And Jeremy and Lauren, I absolutely want to thank you personally once again for joining us today, sharing all this information. Jeremy, I know you're probably tight on time. I want to hopefully have a couple of minutes for you to talk about CPS with us, but Sue can certainly handle that as a participant on the ODP work group for community participation support services and some of the changes that we're trying to help navigate with ODP to expand capacity. So just briefly, we are doing this supports coordination TPA roundtable. We're inviting non-members, anybody who provides any type of service, given the context of everything we've talked about today, and how much this impacts everything and how much we need to make sure that everything is integrated going forward. So Nancy and Sue, I'll ask you to kind of jump in. Nancy, I know you facilitated this panel discussion for us. So certainly anything that you want to add as we kind of close out supports coordination. And then we're going to immediately go into the CPS work group. So I'm going to let each of you take it from here. And thank you. And of course, Craig is with us too to continue this discussion going forward. But Jeremy, Lauren, thank you again very much for being here with us today. And at least, Jeremy, hopefully you can hang for a couple of minutes and give us some feedback on the CPS work group.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Patrick. And yeah, I have another 4 minutes till I have to jump.
Well then, let's not spend too much time on this roundtable discussion. I do, though, however, want to tell members the registration is open. I know that a couple people have already registered, which is great. We're going to be joined that day by a group of support coordinator, executive directors to help facilitate the session. And it really is a great opportunity to just listen to people. What is really needed to help SCOs succeed? As we just heard, 57,000 people with intellectual disabilities across the state have a support coordinator. So this is terrifically important information. And I always remind people, 72% about of those 57,000 live at home with their families. So we're just not doing this for individuals. We're also, doing this for their families as their primary caregivers. So let's go to the next slide, Craig. Sue, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Oh, thank you, Nance. And the only thing I had to say about support coordination before we move on, having sat on that committee, if anything, I felt that we, the people on the committee, and I think Jeremy can attest to this, when it came to the crafting of the standards, we went much further than I think ODP would have went. We held them to tighter standards. So you have the committee to blame on that one. Okay, wouldn't you agree, Jeremy?
There was a lot of spirited dialogue during those sessions, indeed.
Jeremy, would you share with us first, before you have to jump off, ODP's concept of the CPS work group?
Sure. Good to see you, Sue and Nancy. Thank you. So, the deputy secretary is very firmly committed to CPS and Meaningful Day. We know that Kristen, from a policy perspective, really helped to shape what we currently call community participation support. COVID-19 clearly impacted this service. This service was closed for many months. We have staffing issues. And when we look at our data, pre-COVID, we were about 18,000 people were receiving services. Today, we have about 15,000 people receiving CPS services. And what we continue to hear is that for the difference, those 3,000 individuals, many of them have chosen not to go back to CPS. They've found other things that they enjoy during the day. A combination of in-home and community supports and companion and volunteerism, and some have gone into competitive integrated employment. But we continue to hear that this service has not recovered. We continue to hear challenges from families that want more. Right? That even if loved ones are receiving CPS, sometimes they're being underserved because the agency just doesn't have enough staff, doesn't have enough time to support what is being needed or what's being requested. So the focus of this work group is really to take a deeper dive. Let's take a look at what innovation is out there and what can we do differently within ODP. Let's explore this so that we might be able to make an impact and open this up, open this space up to more people receiving CPS. So, thinking of some of those target areas that the Deputy Secretary wants to get into, again, looking at some of those innovative models, and we heard two examples of that during our first session. And maybe Sue will get into that a little bit more. But we're also interested in really exploring more deeply this concept of a hub. As it stands, hubs are generally not places where an agency would own that space. We tend to think of community places like libraries as hubs and other places within the community. But we also know that individuals may want a place to kind of drop in, see some friends, get connected, and then from there maybe go off to a job. And then after their job, take public transportation back to the hub before, they meet up with family or caregivers in the late afternoon or evening. So, really looking at what other models and how else can a hub really be defined. The Deputy Secretary is also committed to taking a look at the applicability of Chapter 2380. And possibly looking at some long-term solutions or long-term structural changes to the way our current regulations sit. One of the things that when Chapter 2380, which is licensing for our day support services, when that was originally conceived, we didn't have Chapter 6100 in place. We do now, and that's where we define expectations around community and expectations around incident management and individual rights. So we have some safeguards built into regulations that maybe we can build some other spaces within the community where we can ensure people are healthy and safe in those environments, and we don't have to get caught up on some of the other regulatory things that oftentimes are a challenge when thinking about innovative spaces in the community, like the size of the facility, access to bathrooms and the specific sizes of those facilities. So I think everything's on the table. I'm sure we will find some harder edges of things that we know can't be changed. But the Deputy Secretary is looking to open this probably up until spring, and hopefully collect all of our really great ideas and then put that into a more formal presentation back to the Information Sharing and Advisory Committee or the ISAC for some considerations and next steps. So with that, I do apologize. I have to jump, but I'm sure this group is in good hands with Sue and Nancy. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy gave a very comprehensive introduction to that first meeting, I've got to say what we did at TPA was we had a meeting amongst our group and sharing our concerns and the things that we needed to be addressed within this committee group. I was pleasantly surprised at the conversation that occurred in the initial meeting, and I hope to see it continued as we go along. And it really was a very open format. Ironically, we had come up with a group of 8 questions, and I never had to stop and say, well, we have this specific question, except for in the area of hub. The rest of them were naturally discussed within the group, all of which were agreed to prior to. So ODP also felt, if you put on this slide, Craig, about lack of clarity and concern. So if you could jump, I think it's the very next slide. Yep, well, one after that. Um, these were the particular questions and concerns that came up from the internal group at TPA. And all of them, whether it was lack of clarity, person-centered planning concerns, inclusion, integration, behavioral support, all of those questions, as I say, were naturally questioned on not just the provider side, but on ODP's side. So I was pleased with that. And no definite answers arose that day, but that it set the tone for the continuing meetings. The next one is September 19th. See, ODP identified their objective as being identifying innovations that expand access to and improve the quality of CPS services. Very general, very broad. We were introduced to 2 innovative models. The one model was called guided meditation and was based kind of on yoga. What I was impressed with this group was they became licensed as behavior specialists under OMSAS. I've always been concerned that within our domain, we have behavior support. We don't go that further step to behavior specialist, as that is the domain of OMSAS. But they had done that in order to really create this very innovative model of guided meditation, because it's guided by the clinical staff. And it's they happen to have a room that they were able to make into a spa-like area. It also became a career path for their DSPs, because, well, they could become yoga certified. And it was really teaching guided meditation, calm down techniques, all of which are very important in ID and autism. The other model was not really much different than what we all already do, except that they had no facility. So they were using their concept of the hub model. And what we really learned at this meeting was everybody has their own concept of hub and no two match. So their concept of hub was that they went and picked up each person individually or within a group, and that group was put together if it was a group based on an activity that group wanted to do. So maybe they wanted to go bowling or they wanted to go to an afternoon movie. So they would be, and each day they had to plan this out because you didn't know what anybody wanted to do. They did kind of at the beginning of the week get a sense of what everyone might want to do during the week, but they really had to plan it day by day. And maybe today you wanted to go to a movie and you wound up in this group. Maybe tomorrow you wanted to play bocce and nobody else wanted to play bocce. So then they would do the service one-on-one. It really was a very staff-intensive model, and I think most of us would struggle with having enough staff to facilitate that, or to be honest with you, with the way we get paid right now, I think we'd really struggle with the fiscal piece of that model. They also, Jeremy talked about drop-in services, uh, also peer support models where individuals with disabilities through approved vendors would be able to become credentialed as a peer support. And that model was extremely intriguing. Nobody has done it. It wasn't a presentation, it was just a concept at this point. They also, we talked about barriers to service recovery and expansion. So, and planned on coming back to that concept at the next meeting. It was, as I say, it was a really good meeting with not many answers yet, but an ability to frame our questions and the fact that honestly, guys, everybody has a different concept of hub. Can you, meet up in your building and make decisions from there? What, keeps you from doing that in a licensed facility? If you can meet up at a coffee house, what really is the difference if you're just trying to set the tone of the meeting or of the day? How do you integrate behavioral support if you're out in the community and someone has difficulties? So there's a lot of meat on the bone to discuss in the coming months. So any questions at this point? Anything in the chat? Okay.
I don't see anything right now. A couple of comments in the chat about how good it is that we're looking at this. So pleased to see that.
I do want to speak to Karen. The meeting did start that this is not a matter of closing down production, that Kristen said she sees production as a very valuable piece of this, as it's really about employment and where else can you better learn the employment skills to be able to take them out into employment in the community. So this, it's not meant as a tug between the two, but just so that while we're out in the community, we're providing, we have more clarity as to what that community should look like. Because we're all struggling with that. If you all go, and we talked about this, that you go to a library and it turns out three other groups from three other providers are in that library. Does that, now, do you have to run out the front door because there's too many of you? And so there was good, strong discussion on that, but it was not in lieu of the fading away of or getting rid of production. Okay, well then I will kick it off to Nancy.
Thanks, Sue. So in terms of our work with the market index legislation, I just want to start off. If there's two things you're going to remember today, remember these two things. This is the first time in history where TPA and the other 5 associations in Pennsylvania now have bipartisan legislative support in both the House and the Senate. So if there is a time that we're going to do this, it's going to be now. The other thing is that this is the first time that we have had support from ODP DHS to apply a market-based index to rates. So again, if we're going to get this done, this is the time we're going to do it. As proposed, as you can see on the slide there, we want to be sure that the fee schedule rates are going to be responsive to the market conditions that affect DSPs. Okay, DSPs are at the center of all of this work. What we know is that using a nationally recognized market index is going to be less costly, more efficient, and more effective than the crazy system that we have right now, which is horribly ineffective, inefficient, and more costly. And simply, we cannot continue to go back to the legislature year after year after year asking for increases to the IDA budget. That is where it's a high cost for that work. And as you all know, we haven't always been fortunate in getting rate increases. But the other part to keep in mind is that going forward, DHS would apply an annual inflation rate according to the Consumer Price Index, which is nationally recognized. It is outside of our system, and it is responsive to market conditions. So it's reliable, it's data driven, and it is the best index that we could possibly have to use. Next slide, Craig. Now, DHS has proposed some amendments to the original bill, and the original bill, if you remember, was House Bill 661 from last session, introduced by Representative Dan Miller and Representative Rob Mercuri. So the amendments that DHS has proposed is that each October 1st, the rates would increase by the percentage change in the CPI for the most recent 12-month period. Easy to do. That, however, would be subject to federal approval in the waiver amendments, which ODP does not see as a problem. It would be subject to the appropriation from the legislature. So obviously, the legislature is still going to have to approve an appropriation. One of the amendments that DHS proposed that obviously we like a lot is that the rates would not go down, even if the CPI decreases. But any decrease would be offset in subsequent year increases. But we would not lose, if the CPI were to decrease, which, as we understand it, does not happen on a very regular basis. Next slide, Craig. So DHS would publish a notice in the PA bulletin of what the proposed rates would be every year. Now, DHS is also proposing that DSPs must receive percentage increases to their wages, which would be identical to the increase to the total rate. So if there was a percentage increase to the CPI of, say, 2%, ODP would be, expecting that DSPs would also get that 2% increase. DHS ODP is also proposing that providers would report the wages, in order to comply with these expectations, and that there might be penalties if a provider decided not to pass on an increase to DSPs. However, any monetary penalties would actually go into our augmentation account. Next slide, Craig. For these purposes, it's a very simple definition of provider of home and community-based services through a program administered by ODP. Probably one of the simplest definitions in our work. Now, the other thing is ODP could still reestablish rates under the 6100s. And for any year in which this occurs, the previous provisions regarding the application of CPI would not apply. But again, that's not something that we would imagine would happen too often. Next slide, Craig. Although, we have begun to hear from some providers about, the idea of penalties, which nobody, likes to hear too much about, or that any increases could only go to DSPs, which is another issues some providers have already brought up. There's also some things that we need to consider to kind of balance. Right now, as we all know, the 6100s only requires a rate review once every 3 years. According to the market index legislation and what ODP is agreeing with, they are agreeing that the rates would be adjusted annually, which we don't have now. The other thing is that the entire rate for a service, or would be increased for each service, by the inflation percentage, not only the DSP compensation portion of the rate. So it's the entire rate that would be increased. So then, when you look at it that way, there's no incentive to expand the staff beyond DSPs, as they would be subject to reporting requirements and penalties, because it's only the DSP compensation portion of the rate. And I know this is really getting into the weeds on all of this. We don't have a lot of time this morning. I know that in hopefully our September meeting, we're going to be able to spend a lot more time on this because we're still doing a lot of work on this. But it's also important, so important that we didn't want to wait until September to provide all this information for folks. Craig, the next slide, please. What you can do, however, now is, and we are asking, every TPA member, and I know we ask this all the time, but as I said in the very beginning, we've got an opportunity here to increase rates. We've got the support of the legislature, we've got the support of DHS and ODP. This is our time, and if we don't do it now, we're not going to do it 2 years from now. As we all know, we also have a governor, we have a budget secretary, who are supportive of this work. So we need everybody to contact your legislators. That's as simple as that. TPA, the other associations, are going to be providing you with all the information you need, all the information for your DSPs, everybody in your organization to go out and talk with legislators. If you need assistance in, formulating what you want to talk with legislators about, how you want to approach it, contact Patrick and I. This is also something to promote on your websites, your social media. Ask the families in your organization, give them the bullet points to go out and talk with their legislators. The other thing we're going to be looking for, and we do have really good relationships with media outlets, to publish articles that will get the attention of legislators. Just a few weeks ago, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette had a letter to the editor on this very issue. And as I said a couple times this morning already, we just need you to work with us, the other 5 associations. This is the first time also all 6 associations have decided we're going to push on this issue. That was not the case even a year ago, but now all 6 of us are working on this issue. All of our lobbyists are working on it and pushing on it. So our ability to succeed is pretty high. Craig, I think there's one more slide. Yeah, the next steps. We are working with Representative Jessica Benham, Representative Jason Ortite, both from Allegheny County, to introduce the House bill. The last time I looked at it, 25% of the supporters already are Republicans. So we have a strong Republican contingent on that list. Of course, we're still trying to get a few more before the bill is introduced. As we've just talked about, there are amendments to the bipartisan Senate bill. We're working with the House Human Services Committee Executive Director to, kind of wordsmith, work with them, agree to the amendment language. All along, obviously, we're going to be having continued dialogue with Kristen, with Secretary Arkush, to get to a point where we can agree on all of the amendments. The Senate bill will mirror the House bill, so the language in both bills will be exactly the same when we get to that point. The other thing is, and I think Patrick mentioned this in the very beginning, um, we do hope to have a hearing this fall on this piece of legislation. And that will be the first time that we've gotten legislative support from both parties to have these hearings. And again, next steps are our continued advocacy across the state with all of the associations. And, as always, we thank everybody for coming together, working together on this. I know this is summer, people are still taking time off. I can assure you that once Labor Day is behind us in 2 weeks, there is going to be a huge, huge push. Your members are home right now. They're not in Harrisburg working on the state budget. So now is a good time to, try to get in-person meetings with them, virtual meetings with them. Do everything you can. If every provider in the state contacted, their House member, their senator, we could do this. Those 253 Pennsylvania legislators would be bombarded, and they would have no choice but to pass this legislation. So it's not a heavy lift. If each organization can just reach out to one House member, one senator, we can do this. And I know we're at the end of our time, so we're not going to open it up to questions today. I'm going to turn it over to Craig, but I also want to make sure that everybody has Friday, September 26th on your calendars. That is the next TPA meeting where we'll be able to spend a lot more time on the market index legislation because we'll be further down the road. Craig, I'll let you finish up.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Sue. We appreciate everybody joining us today. We will be following up the session with the recording and any of the attachments and links if you missed them in the chat. There are a few questions that are in the chat. Oren, I saw your question about the DSP wages. We're not quite sure what that's going to look like yet, but we'll certainly follow up on that. If there are any other questions, you can certainly send those to information@provideralliance.org, and we'll make sure we get back to you whatever information we know. Again, don't forget if you are interested in joining the roundtable, that registration is open on September 18th. We'll include that in the follow-up as well, so encourage everybody to attend that. That'll be a good session for learning and dialogue. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Hope you have a great Labor Day, and we will see you all hopefully on the 18th. Take care, everybody.